The mare's hooves thundered against frozen ground as Emma Ashford leaned low over the saddle, her lungs burning with each breath of ice-laden air that cut through the wool scarf wrapped around her face. She had been riding for 3 hours through the worst blizzard to hit Porterville, California in 20 years, and the small glass vial of morphine tucked inside her coat pocket felt like it weighed 100 pounds, carrying with it the life of her 8-year-old brother Samuel, who lay fevered and screaming back at their ranch, his leg shattered from a logging accident that morning. The wind howled like a living thing, tearing at her coat and hat, sending sheets of snow sideways across the narrow mountain pass that connected Porterville to the larger town of Visalia, where the only doctor for 50 miles kept his practice. And Emma knew with a sinking certainty that she would never make it back before nightfall, perhaps never make it back at all. It was December 1883, and the Sierra Nevada foothills had turned treacherous overnight. Emma had left Samuel in the care of their mother and their ranch hand, old Pete Morrison, but she knew the morphine was their only hope. The doctor in Visalia had been reluctant to let her leave, insisting she wait until the storm passed. But Emma had seen the way Samuel's face contorted with pain, heard his screams echo through their small ranch house, and she had taken the medicine and run to where her mare waited, saddled and ready. The doctor had finally relented, pressing the vial into her hands along with careful instructions, his weathered face grave with concern. Now, halfway between Visalia and Porterville, Emma could barely see 10 feet ahead. The world had become a white void, trees materializing like ghosts only to disappear again behind curtains of snow. Her mare, a steady brown Mustang named Clementine, pushed forward with the determination that had made her Emma's favorite mount. But even Clementine was struggling, her breath coming in great steaming clouds, her flanks trembling with effort. Emma's fingers had gone numb inside her gloves an hour ago, and she could no longer feel her toes in her boots. The cold was a living enemy, seeping through every layer of clothing, stealing warmth and strength with patient malice. She almost missed the dark shape that emerged from the white chaos ahead. Emma pulled sharply on the reins, and Clementine reared slightly, whinnying in protest and alarm. The shape resolved itself into a rider, a man on a large black stallion, and for one heart-stopping moment Emma thought she had encountered a highwayman, someone who might rob her or worse out here in this wilderness where no one would hear her scream. But the man raised a hand in greeting, not threat, and guided his horse closer. Emma could make out a tall figure in a heavy sheepskin coat, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low, a red bandana covering most of his face against the cold. His eyes were what she noticed first, dark and steady, examining her with an intensity that made her straighten in her saddle despite her exhaustion. "You should not be out here," he called over the wind, his voice deep and carrying. "This storm is only getting worse." "I have medicine," Emma shouted back, one hand instinctively going to her coat pocket to protect the vial. "My brother needs it. I have to get back to Porterville." The man guided his stallion closer, and Emma could see him better now. He was young, perhaps 25 or 26, with strong features and a jaw dark with several days' worth of stubble. Ice clung to his eyebrows, and the exposed skin around his eyes was red from the cold wind. "Porterville is still 8 miles from here," he said, and Emma's heart sank at the confirmation of what she had feared. "You will not make it in this weather. Your horse is already exhausted." "I have to try," Emma said, and she heard the desperation in her own voice. "My brother, he is only 8 years old. He broke his leg badly. He needs this morphine. I cannot let him suffer." The man studied her for a long moment, and Emma found herself unable to look away from those dark eyes. She saw him take in her condition, the ice crusted on her coat, the way she swayed slightly in the saddle from fatigue, the determined set of her jaw despite everything. "Give me the medicine," he said finally. Emma's hand tightened protectively over her pocket. "What?" "Your horse is spent, and so are you," the man said, raising his voice as a fresh gust of wind threatened to tear his words away. "My horse is fresh. I came from Porterville this morning, heading to Visalia on business, but I turned back when the storm got too bad. I can make it back to Porterville." "Tell me where to take the medicine." "No," Emma said immediately. "I cannot just give it to a stranger. How do I know you will not just take it and disappear? You do not," the man said bluntly. "But look at your horse. Really look. She is trembling. She will not make 8 more miles in these conditions. You might kill her trying and yourself with her. Then what happens to your brother?" Emma looked down at Clementine and felt tears sting her eyes. The mare was trembling, her head hanging low, her breathing labored. Emma had been so focused on pushing forward that she had not wanted to acknowledge what she was asking of her faithful horse, but the stranger was right. Clementine was at her limit. "Come with me then," Emma said. "We ride together." The man shook his head. "Your horse cannot carry you much further. If you ride with me, we have to leave her here. She will die in this storm." Emma felt torn in 2 directions. Samuel needed the medicine desperately, but Clementine had been with her family for 6 years, had carried Emma through countless miles of California wilderness, had been her companion and friend. The thought of leaving her to die in the snow was unbearable. The stranger seemed to read her thoughts. "There is an old line shack about half a mile north of here," he said. "I passed it on my way. You can take your horse there, get out of the storm, wait it out. I will take the medicine to Porterville. What is your brother's name and where is your ranch?" "Samuel Ashford," Emma said, her mind racing. "The Ashford Ranch, 3 miles east of town, near the river fork. But how do I know I can trust you?" The man reached up and pulled down the bandana covering his face. He was handsome in a rough-hewn way, with a strong nose and a mouth that looked like it smiled easily, though he was not smiling now. "My name is Harrison Quinn. I work as a foreman at the Miller Ranch, 5 miles south of Porterville. You can ask anyone in town about me. I give you my word I will get this medicine to your brother." Emma had heard of the Miller Ranch, one of the largest cattle operations in the area. The name Quinn was vaguely familiar, though she could not place exactly where she had heard it. But there was something in Harrison Quinn's eyes, a steadiness and honesty that made her want to trust him. Still, this was Samuel's life in her hands. "Why would you do this?" she asked. "You do not know me or my brother." "Because it is the right thing to do," Harrison said simply. "And because I had a younger brother once. He died of fever when he was 7. I would have ridden through worse than this storm if it could have saved him." The grief in his voice was real and raw, and it decided Emma. She reached into her coat pocket and carefully drew out the small vial, wrapped in cloth for protection. "The doctor said to give him a 1/4 teaspoon every 4 hours as needed for pain. No more than that or it could be dangerous." Harrison took the vial with careful, gloved hands and tucked it securely into an inner pocket of his coat. "I will get it to him. You have my word." "Thank you," Emma said, and then, because she needed him to understand, "If anything happens to this medicine, if you do not deliver it, my brother will suffer terribly. Please." "I understand," Harrison said, his eyes locked on hers. "I will not fail you. Now get to that line shack. Follow the tree line north. You will see it set back in a clearing. There should be wood stacked inside for a fire. Wait out the storm there." Before Emma could respond, Harrison had wheeled his black stallion around and was pushing back toward Porterville, disappearing into the white curtain of snow within seconds. Emma sat on Clementine for a moment, watching him vanish, feeling suddenly very alone. She had just given her brother's only hope for relief to a complete stranger. What if she had made a terrible mistake? But Clementine chose that moment to stumble, catching herself but nearly going down, and Emma knew she had made the only choice possible. She turned the mare north, following the tree line as Harrison had instructed, and within 10 minutes she spotted the dark shape of a small cabin set back among the pines. The line shack was barely more than 4 walls and a roof, used by ranchers moving cattle through the mountain passes, but right now it looked like salvation. Emma dismounted and had to catch herself as her legs nearly gave out. She had been in the saddle for over 3 hours in brutal cold, and her body was protesting violently. She led Clementine to the side of the shack, where a small lean-to offered some protection from the wind, then forced her numb fingers to work at unsaddling the mare. It took far longer than it should have, her hands clumsy and painful as circulation slowly returned. She rubbed Clementine down with handfuls of the driest snow she could find, trying to get some of the ice and sweat off the mare's coat, then covered her with the saddle blanket. "I am sorry, girl," Emma whispered, pressing her forehead against Clementine's neck. "I pushed you too hard. I am so sorry." The mare nickered softly as if to forgive her, and Emma felt hot tears finally spill over and freeze on her cheeks. She was exhausted, terrified for Samuel, worried about whether she had made the right choice trusting Harrison Quinn. And now she was trapped in a lined shack in the middle of a blizzard with no way of knowing if her brother was getting the help he needed. Emma forced herself to move, knowing that if she stood still much longer she would freeze. The door to the shack was stuck, ice having sealed it shut, but she threw her shoulder against it until it gave way with a crack. Inside was dark and cold but blessedly out of the wind. Emma could make out a small potbelly stove in one corner, a rough wooden bunk, and a stack of firewood exactly where Harrison had said it would be. She sent up a prayer of thanks to whatever rancher had left supplies here for stranded travelers. Getting a fire started was another challenge with her numb hands, but Emma had grown up on a ranch and had been building fires since she was a child. She coaxed kindling to life with the matches she kept in a waterproof tin in her pocket, then carefully added larger pieces of wood until flames were crackling steadily in the stove. The warmth that began to seep into the small space felt like a miracle. Emma collapsed onto the bunk, not bothering to remove her wet coat or boots, and stared at the stove as heat slowly returned to her body along with pain as frozen flesh thawed. She could not stop thinking about Harrison Quinn, about whether he would keep his word, about whether Samuel was still conscious back at the ranch, or if the pain had become too much. Her mother would be beside herself with worry, both for Samuel and for Emma, who had not returned when expected. The storm raged outside, wind shrieking around the corners of the shack, and Emma closed her eyes, too tired to do anything but pray that she had made the right decision. Meanwhile, Harrison Quinn was pushing his stallion hard through the blizzard, heading back toward Porterville with single-minded determination. Duke, his black stallion, was a strong horse with stamina to spare, and Harrison trusted him to find the way even when visibility dropped to almost nothing. Harrison had ridden this route dozens of times, knew every turn and landmark, and he used that knowledge now to navigate by instinct as much as sight. The girl's face haunted him. She had been beautiful despite the exhaustion and cold, with striking green eyes that held both desperation and courage. Emma Ashford. He turned the name over in his mind as he rode. He knew of the Ashford Ranch, a small operation that had struggled since John Ashford died 2 years ago in a riding accident, leaving his widow and 2 children to manage alone. Harrison had not realized one of those children was a young woman close to his own age. The other must be the brother Samuel, the boy who needed this medicine. Harrison touched his coat pocket where the vial rested, feeling the small, hard shape of it. He had meant what he said to Emma. He had lost his own younger brother to illness, had watched helplessly as fever consumed little Thomas, and the memory still ached years later. If he could prevent another family from experiencing that grief, he would ride through hell itself. The miles passed slowly, each one a battle against wind and snow. Harrison's face was raw from the cold despite the bandana, and ice had formed on his eyelashes, making it hard to blink. But Duke pushed on faithfully, and Harrison urged him forward with voice and heel, promising the stallion warm shelter and grain once they reached town. It was nearly dark when Harrison finally spotted the first buildings of Porterville emerging from the white chaos. The small town looked deserted, everyone sensible having taken shelter from the storm hours ago. Harrison oriented himself and turned east, heading toward the river fork and the Ashford ranch. 3 miles had never seemed so long. When he finally saw the lights of the ranch house glowing through the snow, Harrison felt a surge of relief so strong it made him dizzy. He rode straight up to the front porch and dismounted, his legs stiff and protesting. He tied Duke quickly to the porch rail and pounded on the door. It opened almost immediately, and a woman stood there, perhaps 40 years old, with Emma's same green eyes but lined with worry and exhaustion. Behind her, Harrison could hear screaming, a child's voice raw with agony, and his heart clenched. "Who are you?" the woman demanded, starting to close the door against the cold. "Harrison Quinn from the Miller Ranch," Harrison said quickly. "Your daughter Emma sent me. I have medicine for Samuel." The woman's eyes went wide. "Emma, where is she? Why did she not come herself?" "She is safe in a lined shack about 8 miles out waiting out the storm," Harrison said. "Her horse was exhausted. I had a fresh mount. She asked me to bring the medicine." He pulled the vial from his pocket and held it out. "Morphine. The doctor said a quarter teaspoon every 4 hours." The woman took the vial with shaking hands, tears springing to her eyes. "Thank God. Thank you. Please come in out of the cold." Harrison stepped inside gratefully, closing the door behind him against the wind. The house was warm, a fire roaring in the hearth, and the screaming had stopped momentarily. Harrison could see through an open doorway to a small bedroom where a boy lay on a bed, his legs splinted and wrapped, his face pale and streaked with tears. "This is my son Samuel," the woman said, moving quickly to the bedroom. "I am Margaret Ashford. Our ranch hand Pete is trying to keep him still, but the pain is so terrible." Harrison followed her to the doorway and saw an older man, weathered and gray-haired, holding the boy's shoulders gently but firmly. Samuel's eyes were glazed with agony, and he was breathing in short, sharp gasps. "I have medicine, sweetheart," Margaret said, already measuring out a careful dose into a spoon. "This will help with the pain. You need to swallow this for me." Samuel took the medicine with a whimper, and Margaret stroked his hair, murmuring soothing words. Harrison stood in the doorway, feeling like an intruder on an intimate family moment, but Margaret looked up at him with such gratitude that he could not bring himself to leave. "How can I ever thank you?" she asked. "You risked your life in this storm to bring this to us." "Your daughter risked hers first," Harrison said. "She made it all the way to Visalia and back before I met her. She was determined to get this medicine home no matter what." Margaret's eyes filled with tears again. "That sounds like Emma. She has been the strong one since her father died, holding this family together. Is she truly safe?" "She is in a sturdy lined shack with firewood and shelter," Harrison assured her. "She will be able to wait out the storm there and make her way back once it clears." I made sure her horse was with her. Margaret nodded, then seemed to realize that Harrison was soaked through and probably half frozen. You must stay here tonight. You cannot go back out in this storm. We have a spare room and it is the least we can do. Harrison wanted to protest, to insist on getting back to the Miller ranch, but truthfully he was exhausted and Duke needed rest. I would be grateful, he admitted. Let me see to my horse first. Pete, the ranch hand, spoke up from his position by Samuel's bed. I will take care of your horse. You get yourself warm and dry. The barn is stocked with hay and grain. His name is Duke, Harrison said. And I appreciate it. Pete nodded and stood, moving past Harrison with the competent efficiency of a man who had worked with horses all his life. Harrison watched him go, then turned back to find Samuel's eyes on him, already looking clearer as the morphine began to work. You brought the medicine, the boy asked, his voice hoarse from screaming. Your sister brought it, Harrison corrected. I just finished the journey. Is Emma all right? Samuel asked, and despite his pain and youth, Harrison could hear genuine concern. She is fine, Harrison said firmly. She is safe and warm, and she will be home as soon as the storm clears. You focus on getting better. Samuel nodded and closed his eyes, his face relaxing for the first time since Harrison had arrived. Margaret touched Harrison's arm gently. Come, she said. Let me find you dry clothes and something hot to eat. You have done more than enough tonight. Harrison followed her from the bedroom, leaving Samuel to rest. Margaret led him to a small room off the kitchen, pressed a pile of clothes into his hands that must have belonged to the late Mr. Ashford, and pointed him toward the washroom. Harrison changed gratefully, peeling off his frozen clothes and putting on dry wool trousers and a warm flannel shirt. When he emerged, Margaret had hot coffee and a plate of stew waiting at the kitchen table. Eat, she commanded gently. You must be starving. Harrison was, he realized, ravenous. He ate the stew quickly, barely tasting it, and accepted a second helping. Margaret sat across from him with her own cup of coffee, watching him with those green eyes so like her daughter's. Tell me about meeting Emma, she said. Where exactly did you find her? Harrison recounted the encounter, describing how determined Emma had been, how she had not wanted to trust him with the medicine, how her love for her brother had overcome every other concern. Margaret listened with a mixture of pride and worry on her face. She has had to grow up too fast, Margaret said softly. After John died, Emma took on so much responsibility. She works this ranch as hard as any man, helps with Samuel, never complains. I worry about her. She is clearly capable, Harrison said, and brave. Not many people would have made that ride in these conditions. No, Margaret agreed, but she should not have to be that brave. She should be thinking about dancing and courting and her future, not about whether her little brother will live or die. Harrison did not know what to say to that, so he focused on his stew. Outside, the storm continued to rage, and he thought about Emma alone in that lined shack, waiting. He hoped she had managed to get a good fire going, that she was warm and safe. As if reading his thoughts, Margaret said, Do you think she will truly be all right out there? The lined shack is solid, Harrison said. I checked it on my way to Visalia this morning. It has a good roof and walls, plenty of firewood. She will be cold and probably frightened, but she will survive the night. Margaret nodded, seeming to take comfort from his certainty. You said you work at the Miller Ranch. I am the foreman there, Harrison confirmed. Have been for 3 years now. Before that I worked on ranches down in Southern California, learning the trade. And you have family here? Harrison's jaw tightened slightly. No, my parents and brother are buried in San Diego. I came north after Thomas died, needed a fresh start somewhere that did not have memories on every corner. Margaret's expression softened with understanding. I am sorry for your loss. Losing a child is a pain that never fully heals. No, Harrison agreed quietly. It does not. But you do learn to carry it. They sat in companionable silence for a few moments, then Margaret stood. I should check on Samuel. The spare room is just down the hall, second door on the right. Please make yourself comfortable. And Mr. Quinn, thank you again. You may well have saved my son's life tonight. Harrison, he said. Please just call me Harrison, Margaret smiled. Then you must call me Margaret. Good night, Harrison. Good night. Harrison finished his coffee and made his way to the spare room. It was small but clean, with a comfortable bed and warm quilts. He lay down fully dressed, intending to rest for just a few minutes, but exhaustion claimed him and he fell into deep sleep within moments. Back in the line shack, Emma had finally stopped shivering. The fire in the stove was burning steadily, and she had removed her wet outer clothes to hang them near the heat to dry. She sat on the bunk, wrapped in the single thin blanket she had found there, staring at the flames visible through the gaps around the stove door, and tried not to think about all the things that could go wrong. What if Harrison Quinn had not made it to the ranch? What if he had gotten lost in the storm or taken a fall? What if he had simply taken the medicine and sold it, pocketing the money instead of delivering it to Samuel? Emma knew morphine was valuable, that there were men who would steal it without a second thought. But something about Harrison had seemed honest. Maybe it was the way he had looked at her, direct and unflinching. Maybe it was the grief she had heard in his voice when he spoke of his own lost brother. Or maybe it was simply that Emma had needed to trust someone, had needed to believe that not every stranger was a threat. She thought about his face, the strong features and dark eyes, the capable way he sat his horse even in the midst of the blizzard. Harrison Quinn. Emma repeated the name silently, committing it to memory. If he had kept his word, she owed him a debt she could never fully repay. If he had not, well, she would find him and make him regret betraying her trust. The night stretched long and cold. Emma dozed fitfully, waking every time the wind gusted particularly hard or when she needed to add wood to the stove. She thought about Samuel, hoping the medicine had reached him in time, hoping he was sleeping peacefully now instead of screaming in agony. She thought about her mother, who would be frantic with worry. And she thought about Harrison Quinn, riding through the storm for a family he did not know, keeping a promise to a stranger. Dawn came slowly, gray light filtering through the gaps in the shack's walls. The storm had finally begun to ease, the wind dying down to occasional gusts instead of the constant howling shriek. Emma stood stiffly and went to the door, opening it to look outside. Snow had drifted deep around the shack, and the world was blanketed in white, but she could see more than 10 feet now, could make out the shapes of trees and the slope of the land. The worst had passed. Emma checked on Clementine, relieved to find the mare alert and nickering for attention. The horse had weathered the storm well under the lean-to, protected from the worst of the wind. Emma fed her the grain she had brought in her saddlebags, not much but enough to give Clementine some strength, then saddled up as quickly as her stiff hands would allow. The ride back to Porterville took nearly 2 hours, Clementine moving slowly through the deep snow, but Emma's heart lifted as familiar landmarks appeared. When the ranch house finally came into view, she urged Clementine into a faster walk, desperate to know if Samuel was all right. She had barely dismounted when the front door burst open and Margaret came running out, tears streaming down her face. Emma's heart plummeted, fearing the worst, but then her mother was hugging her fiercely, laughing and crying at the same time. "He is all right," Margaret said before Emma could ask. "Samuel is sleeping peacefully. The medicine worked, and you are home safe. Thank God, thank God." Emma sagged with relief so profound she nearly fell. Margaret held her up, guiding her toward the house. Come inside. You must be frozen through. Harrison is still here. He stayed the night. He was worried about you too. At the mention of Harrison's name, Emma felt her pulse quicken. He had kept his word. He had delivered the medicine. As Emma stepped into the warm house, she saw him emerge from the kitchen, and their eyes met across the room. Harrison looked tired but smiled when he saw her, a genuine smile of relief. "You made it back," he said, stating the obvious but somehow making it sound meaningful. "Thanks to you," Emma replied, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. "You saved my brother's life." "We saved his life," Harrison corrected. "You rode through that storm to get the medicine in the first place." Emma wanted to say more, to express the gratitude that was overwhelming her, but Samuel's voice called weakly from the bedroom. "Emma, is that you?" She hurried to her brother's side, dropping to her knees next to his bed. Samuel was pale, but his eyes were clear, the terrible strain of pain gone from his face. "You came back," he said. "I knew you would." "Of course I did," Emma said, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. "How do you feel?" "It still hurts," Samuel admitted, "but not like before." "The medicine helps. Mr. Quinn brought it just like you asked him to. He is a good man, Emma." "Yes," Emma agreed, glancing back toward the doorway where Harrison stood watching them. "Yes, he is." She stayed with Samuel for a while, holding his hand and telling him about the storm and the lined shack, making it sound like an adventure instead of a terrifying ordeal. When Samuel finally drifted back to sleep, Emma emerged to find Harrison preparing to leave, pulling on his now dry coat. "You are going?" Emma asked, and she could not quite keep the disappointment from her voice. "I need to get back to the Miller ranch," Harrison said. "Mr. Miller will be wondering what happened to me. I was only supposed to be gone for the day." "Of course," Emma said quickly. "I understand. But please let me thank you properly. Perhaps you could come back for dinner, tomorrow or whenever you have time." Harrison hesitated, and Emma saw something flicker in his dark eyes, uncertainty perhaps, or maybe hope. "I would like that," he said finally. "I would like that very much." "Tomorrow then," Emma said firmly. "Come at 6 if you can. It is the least we can do." Harrison nodded, settling his hat on his head. "Tomorrow at 6. And Emma, I am glad you made it back safely. I was worried." The use of her first name sent a little thrill through Emma that she tried to ignore. "Thank you, Harrison, for everything." He tipped his hat to her and to Margaret, then headed out to the barn where Pete had prepared Duke for the journey. Emma watched from the window as Harrison mounted and rode away, disappearing down the snow-covered trail toward town. She felt oddly bereft at his departure, which made no sense. She barely knew the man. Margaret came to stand beside her at the window. "He is a good man," she said softly. "You were right to trust him." "Yes," Emma agreed. "He is." The rest of that day passed in a blur of exhaustion and relief. Emma slept for several hours, making up for the sleepless night in the lined shack. When she woke, the house was quiet except for the crackling of the fire and the soft murmur of her mother's voice reading to Samuel. Emma lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, and could not stop thinking about Harrison Quinn. The next day, Emma found herself nervously preparing for dinner with far more care than the occasion warranted. She told herself she was just being a gracious hostess, thanking the man who had helped her family, but the truth was she could not get Harrison's face out of her mind. The way he had looked at her during that brief meeting in the blizzard, the steadiness in his voice when he promised to deliver the medicine, the smile he had given her when she arrived home safely. Margaret noticed Emma's unusual attention to her appearance and said nothing, but her knowing smile made Emma blush. Emma put on her best dress, a deep blue wool that brought out her eyes, and pinned up her dark hair in a style that was practical but still pretty. When 6 o'clock arrived and she heard hoofbeats approaching, Her heart began to race. Harrison arrived exactly on time, cleaned up and wearing what must have been his Sunday best, a pressed white shirt under a dark vest and jacket. He carried a small bouquet of winter flowers, hardy mountain blooms that had somehow survived the storm, and presented them to Margaret with courtly politeness. "For you, madam, to thank you for your hospitality yesterday." Margaret accepted them with delight, and Emma felt a small pang that the flowers had not been for her, which was ridiculous. Harrison was here out of courtesy, nothing more. Dinner was a warm, comfortable affair. Margaret had cooked a roast chicken with all the fixings, and they ate in the dining room with Samuel propped up on the settee nearby so he could be part of the gathering. Harrison proved to be easy company, with a dry sense of humor and a gift for storytelling. He regaled them with tales of working on various ranches, of cattle drives and difficult bosses, of the time a steer had chased him up a tree and left him stranded there for 3 hours. Emma found herself laughing more than she had in months, and she noticed that Harrison's eyes kept returning to her face, as if he found her reactions as entertaining as his stories. Samuel was enchanted by Harrison, asking question after question about ranch work and horses, and Harrison answered each one patiently, treating the boy with respect. After dinner, Margaret shooed Emma and Harrison out to the front porch, claiming she needed to get Samuel settled for the night. Emma suspected her mother was matchmaking, but she did not protest. The evening was cold but clear, the storm's aftermath leaving the world crystalline and beautiful under a sky full of stars. "Your brother seems to be doing better," Harrison said, leaning against the porch railing. "Much better," Emma agreed, standing beside him and looking out at the snow-covered landscape. "The doctor should be able to come out tomorrow to check on him properly, but the morphine made all the difference. He can rest now, let his body heal. That must be a relief for you." "You cannot imagine," Emma said softly. "Or maybe you can, you lost your brother, you know what that fear feels like." Harrison was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "Yes, I know. It is part of why I could not refuse when you asked me to take the medicine. I kept thinking about Thomas, about how I would have done anything to save him. How old was he when he died? 7. Scarlet fever. It was fast, brutal. 1 week he was running around playing, the next he was gone." Harrison's voice was rough with old grief. "That was 4 years ago, but sometimes it feels like yesterday." Emma reached out without thinking and placed her hand on his arm. "I am sorry. That is a terrible thing to endure." Harrison looked down at her hand, then at her face, and Emma felt her breath catch at the intensity in his eyes. "Life on the frontier is hard," he said quietly. "We all carry losses, but we keep going, we have to." "Yes," Emma agreed. "We do." They stood there for a long moment, Emma's hand still on Harrison's arm, neither of them moving. Emma was acutely aware of how close they were standing, of the warmth of Harrison's body even through his jacket, of the way her heart was beating faster than it should. "Emma," Harrison said, his voice low, "I know we have only just met, but I find myself wanting to see you again. Would that be all right? I do not want to presume, but I would like to call on you properly if you are amenable." Emma felt a smile spread across her face, warm and genuine. "I would like that very much." Harrison's answering smile was like sunrise, transforming his serious face into something bright and hopeful. "Then I will come back. Soon. With your mother's permission, of course." "She will give it," Emma said with certainty. "She already likes you, Samuel adores you, and I." She paused, feeling brave. "I would very much like to know you better." "Then that is what we will do," Harrison said. He reached up and gently took her hand from his arm, holding it in both of his. "Take our time, court properly, see where this leads." "Yes," Emma said, And even though it was cold and she should go inside, she did not want this moment to end. Harrison seemed to feel the same way because he held her hand for another long moment before finally, reluctantly, releasing it. "I should go. It is late and you have had a long few days. You need rest. Will you come back tomorrow?" Emma asked, then felt foolish for being so forward, but Harrison just smiled. "If I can get away from work, yes, I will try." Emma walked him to where Duke waited, saddled and patient. Harrison mounted in one smooth motion, then looked down at her. "Good night, Emma Ashford. Thank you for trusting me with your brother's medicine and for giving me the chance to know your family." "Good night, Harrison Quinn," Emma replied. "Ride safe." She watched him ride away until he was out of sight, then stood in the cold for several more minutes, hugging herself and smiling like a fool. When she finally went inside, Margaret was waiting with a knowing look. "He seems like a fine young man," Margaret said mildly. "He is," Emma agreed. "And handsome too." "Mother," Emma protested, but she was blushing and Margaret laughed. "I am just saying. Your father would have approved. Harrison has good character, works hard, treats people with respect. Those are the qualities that matter." Emma thought about Harrison's face during the storm, the determination in his eyes when he promised to deliver the medicine, the gentleness in his voice when he spoke about his lost brother. "Yes," she said softly, "he does have good character." True to his word, Harrison returned the next day and the day after that, and the one after that. Sometimes he could only stay for an hour, stealing time from his work at the Miller Ranch, but he always made the ride out to the Ashford place. He helped Pete with chores around the ranch, repairs that had been neglected since John Ashford's death, things that were too heavy or difficult for the women to manage alone. He sat with Samuel and told him stories, teaching the boy card games and whittling simple figures from wood scraps. And he courted Emma with a quiet, steady determination that made her heart race. They took walks when the weather permitted, always properly chaperoned by Margaret's watchful eye from the window. They talked about everything and nothing, discovering shared interests and different perspectives, learning each other's histories and hopes for the future. Harrison told Emma about growing up in San Diego, about his father who had been a blacksmith and his mother who had died when Harrison was 15, about the restlessness that had driven him north after Thomas's death. Emma told Harrison about her father's accident, about the struggle to keep the ranch running, about her dreams of expanding their small herd and maybe one day having enough cattle to drive to market. "You have big ambitions," Harrison said one afternoon as they walked along the river, several weeks after their first meeting. The snow was beginning to melt, spring starting to assert itself despite the lingering cold. "Is that wrong?" Emma asked, suddenly defensive. "Not at all," Harrison said quickly. "I admire it. Most women would have given up, sold the ranch after their father died, but you kept fighting." "This is my home," Emma said simply. "My father built this place from nothing. I will not let it fail just because I am a woman." "You could marry," Harrison pointed out carefully. "A husband could help run the ranch." Emma stopped walking and turned to face him, her chin raised. "I will not marry just to have someone to run my ranch. If I marry, it will be for love. And even then, any man I married would have to understand that this ranch is mine. I will not hand over control just because I take a husband." Harrison looked at her for a long moment, and Emma braced herself for an argument. Most men would be offended by such a declaration, would insist that a wife should submit to her husband's authority. But Harrison surprised her. "I would expect nothing less from you," he said softly. "You are not the kind of woman to be controlled or managed." "Any man worthy of you would understand that." Emma felt warmth flood through her that had nothing to do with the spring sunshine. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Emma," Harrison said, taking a step closer, I want to be clear about my intentions. I am courting you. I am courting you because I think you are remarkable, because I admire your strength and courage, because I find myself thinking about you every moment we are apart. I want a future with you. But I want you to know that I would never try to take this ranch from you or diminish what you have built. If you choose me, if we marry someday, this would still be your ranch. I would work alongside you, not over you. Emma's heart was pounding so hard she was sure Harrison could hear it. They had been courting for only a few weeks, but she knew with sudden, absolute certainty that this was the man she wanted to marry. Harrison Quinn, who had ridden through a blizzard for a stranger's brother, who treated Samuel with kindness and Margaret with respect, who saw Emma's strength as something to admire rather than fear. "I am glad," Emma managed to say, her voice slightly breathless, "because I find myself thinking about you constantly as well, and I very much like the idea of a future with you." Harrison's face lit up with joy, and he reached for her hands, holding them gently. "Then we are agreed. We will continue this courtship properly, give ourselves time to be certain, but with the understanding that we are both hoping it leads to marriage." "Yes," Emma said, smiling up at him. "We are agreed." That was the first time Harrison kissed her, a brief, chaste press of lips that still managed to make Emma feel like her entire body was on fire. When they pulled apart, both of them were blushing like teenagers, and Emma could not stop smiling. The weeks that followed were the happiest of Emma's life. Harrison continued to visit daily, becoming a fixture at the Ashford ranch. He officially asked Margaret for permission to court Emma, which made the older woman tear up with joy. He helped with the spring work, riding fence lines and assisting with the birth of new calves. Samuel's leg healed slowly but well, and the boy followed Harrison around like a devoted puppy whenever he was able to walk. Emma felt herself falling deeper in love with Harrison every day. She loved the way he laughed at Samuel's jokes, the way he consulted her on ranch decisions instead of assuming he knew better, the way he kissed her good night on the porch with such tender reverence it made her knees weak. He was everything she had ever wanted in a partner, strong and capable but also kind and respectful. Summer came to the California foothills, turning the world green and gold. Harrison spoke to Mr. Miller about his intentions, and the older rancher gave his blessing, even offering to help Harrison build a small house on the corner of the Ashford property where the two ranches bordered, a wedding gift of sorts. Emma and Harrison began making plans in earnest, talking about a fall wedding after the harvest was in. One evening in late July, Harrison arrived at the ranch with a small box in his pocket and nervousness in his eyes. Emma knew immediately what was coming, and her heart began to race. They walked out to their favorite spot by the river, where the water ran clear and fast over smooth stones, and Harrison took both her hands in his. "Emma Ashford," he said, his voice steady despite his nerves. "I fell in love with you the moment I saw you in that blizzard, riding through hell itself to save your brother. Every day since, I have loved you more. You are the strongest, bravest, most beautiful woman I have ever known, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving myself worthy of you. Will you marry me?" He opened the box to reveal a simple gold ring with a small but perfect diamond, and Emma felt tears spring to her eyes. "Yes," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, Harrison, I will marry you. I love you so much." Harrison slipped the ring on her finger, then pulled her into his arms and kissed her with a passion that made Emma's head spin. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Harrison pressed his forehead against hers. "I will make you happy," he promised. "I swear I will spend every day trying to make you happy." "You already do," Emma said. "You already do." They were married in October, in a simple ceremony at the small church in Porterville with half the town in attendance. Emma wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit, and carried a bouquet of fall wildflowers. Samuel, walking with only a slight limp now, stood as Harrison's best man, proud as could be in his new suit. Margaret cried through the entire ceremony, tears of joy for her daughter's happiness. Harrison moved into the ranch house temporarily, he and Pete working to finish the new house that Mr. Miller had helped them build. It was small but well made, with a large bedroom, a kitchen with a real iron stove, and a front porch that looked out over the valley. Emma loved it on sight, seeing all the thought and care that Harrison had put into making it a home for them. Their wedding night was tender and passionate, Harrison treating Emma with such care and reverence that she fell in love with him all over again. Afterward, lying in his arms, Emma thought about the blizzard that had brought them together, about how close they had come to never meeting at all. "What are you thinking about?" Harrison asked, his voice a low rumble in the darkness. "About fate," Emma said. "About how if that storm had not happened, if Samuel had not been hurt, if I had not ridden to Visalia that day, we might never have met." "I do not believe that," Harrison said, tightening his arms around her. "I think we would have found each other somehow. We were meant to be together." Emma smiled against his chest. "That is a romantic notion from a practical cowboy." "You bring out the romantic in me," Harrison replied, and she could hear the smile in his voice. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Emma and Harrison worked the ranch together, combining her land with the resources Harrison brought from his position at the Miller Ranch. They slowly built up their herd, bought better breeding stock, and began to develop a reputation for quality cattle. Samuel continued to heal and grow, becoming Harrison's eager apprentice, learning everything the older man could teach him about ranching. Margaret thrived having Harrison as part of the family, the worry lines on her face easing as she watched her daughter's happiness. The first winter of their marriage brought another heavy snowstorm, and Emma found herself standing on their porch watching it fall, remembering that terrible ride through the blizzard a year earlier. Harrison came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "Thinking about that night?" he asked. "Yes," Emma admitted. "I was so frightened, but it brought me you. It brought us each other," Harrison corrected. "You were the bravest thing I had ever seen, riding through that storm. I knew right then I was going to fall in love with you." Emma turned in his arms to face him. "I have something to tell you, something I have been waiting to be sure about." Harrison's eyes searched her face. "What is it?" "I am pregnant," Emma said, watching joy bloom across his features. "We are going to have a baby." Harrison let out a whoop of delight and picked her up, spinning her around before setting her down carefully. "A baby! We are having a baby! Emma, I am so happy I could burst." "I hope it is a boy," Emma said, thinking of Thomas, the brother Harrison had lost. "I hope it is healthy," Harrison said firmly. "Boy or girl, I do not care as long as you both come through it safely." Their son was born the following summer, a healthy, squalling infant with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. They named him Thomas John, honoring both Harrison's lost brother and Emma's father. Harrison held his son with tears streaming down his face, and Emma thought she had never seen anything more beautiful than her strong, capable husband cradling their tiny baby with such infinite gentleness. Samuel was thrilled to be an uncle, even though he was only 10 years old. Margaret was overjoyed to be a grandmother, spending hours rocking Thomas and singing to him. The ranch prospered, the family grew closer, and Emma thought her heart might burst from happiness. 2 years later, they had a daughter, whom they named Sarah Margaret after Harrison's mother and Emma's. Thomas was a doting big brother from the start, helping to fetch diapers and singing to his sister in his childish voice. Samuel, now 12, took his role as uncle very seriously, carving toys for his nephew and niece with increasing skill. The years passed in a blur of work and love and family. The ranch grew into one of the most successful operations in the region, known for quality cattle and honest dealing. Harrison and Emma worked side by side every day, partners in every sense of the word. They had their disagreements, as any couple does, but they always worked through them with respect and love. Samuel grew into a fine young man, eventually marrying a girl from town and building his own house on the far corner of the Ashford property. Margaret lived to see her great-grandchildren, passing peacefully in her sleep at the age of 68, having known nothing but joy in her final years. Harrison and Emma added to their family twice more, a second son named William and another daughter named Grace. Their house rang with laughter and noise, with children running in and out and the organized chaos of a large, loving family. Harrison expanded the original small house, adding rooms as they needed them, until it was a sprawling, comfortable home filled with warmth and life. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Emma and Harrison took a rare evening alone, riding up to the line shack where Emma had waited out the storm so many years ago. It was still there, weathered but sturdy, maintained by ranchers who used the mountain passes. They built a fire in the old stove and sat together on the bunk, wrapped in blankets against the autumn chill. "Do you remember that night?" Emma asked, leaning against Harrison's shoulder. "Every detail," Harrison said. "You were half frozen and exhausted but still fierce as a wildcat, ready to defend that medicine with your life." "I thought I might be making a terrible mistake trusting you," Emma admitted, "but something in your eyes made me believe you would keep your word." "Best mistake you ever made," Harrison teased. "No," Emma said seriously, turning to look at him. "Best decision. You have given me everything, Harrison. A partnership, a family, a life fuller than I ever dreamed possible. I love you more now than I did that day you proposed by the river." Harrison kissed her softly. "And I love you more than I did the day we married. You are my heart, Emma. You always will be." They stayed in the line shack that night, making love with the tenderness of long familiarity and the passion that had never faded. When dawn broke, they rode home together, back to the ranch and the life they had built, side by side. The years continued to pass. Thomas grew into a strong young man who took over much of the ranch work, alongside his father and Uncle Samuel. Sarah married a lawyer from Visalia and moved to town, though she visited often with her growing brood of children. William showed an aptitude for horses and began breeding them alongside the cattle operation, developing a line of quality working horses that became sought after throughout the region. Grace, the youngest, inherited her mother's fierce independence and announced her intention to become a teacher, eventually opening a school in Porterville that served the children of ranching families for miles around. Harrison's hair turned gray at the temples, then white, but his strength never seemed to fade. He still rode out every day to check the herd, still worked alongside the men he employed, still treated Emma with the same tender devotion he had shown from the beginning. Emma's dark hair also silvered, and lines appeared around her eyes and mouth, but Harrison told her she was more beautiful than ever, and she believed him because she saw the truth of it in his eyes. They became pillars of the community, known for their generosity and fairness. During hard years when other ranches struggled, Emma and Harrison extended credit and helped their neighbors however they could, remembering their own difficult times. They gave money to build a church and a school, donated cattle for community events, and opened their home to anyone who needed help. When Emma was 53 years old, a terrible winter storm hit the region, the worst since the blizzard of 1883. A young woman from one of the neighboring ranches came pounding on their door in the middle of the night, desperate for help. Her child was ill with fever, and she needed to get to the doctor in Visalia, but was terrified to make the journey alone in the storm. Harrison was already reaching for his coat when Emma stopped him. "Let Thomas go," she said quietly. "He knows the route as well as you do, and he is younger, stronger." Harrison looked like he wanted to protest, but he nodded, recognizing the wisdom in her words. Thomas saddled up within minutes and rode out with the young woman, promising to see her safely to Visalia and back. He returned the next day with the doctor and medicine, the child's life saved, and Emma felt a profound sense of satisfaction. The cycle had come full circle. The kindness and courage that Harrison had shown her all those years ago lived on in their son. Emma and Harrison celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary surrounded by children and grandchildren, the house bursting with family. Samuel was there with his wife and 4 children. Sarah brought her 5. Thomas had recently married and his wife was expecting their first child. William brought his sweetheart, a shy girl from town whom he was planning to propose to. Grace arrived with several of her students, children who had nowhere else to go for the holidays and whom she had essentially adopted. Looking around the crowded, noisy, joyful house, Emma felt overwhelmed with gratitude. All of this, every bit of it, had started with a desperate ride through a blizzard and a cowboy brave enough to meet her halfway. Harrison found her in the kitchen, stealing a moment of quiet, and pulled her into his arms. "What are you thinking about, my love?" "About how lucky I am," Emma said. "About how one terrible storm led to the greatest blessing of my life." "I am the lucky one," Harrison insisted. "I was just riding to Visalia on business. I could have turned back sooner, could have missed you entirely, but I did not. I found you, and you trusted me." "I will always trust you," Emma said, reaching up to cup his weathered face in her hands. "For the rest of my life, however long that is, I will trust you." They kissed, a soft press of lips that still held all the passion and promise of their youth, and Emma thought that this, right here, was what happiness looked like. Not a single moment, but a lifetime of moments, strung together with love and work and family and faith. The years marched on, as years do. Emma and Harrison grew older but never seemed old, always too busy with the ranch and their ever-expanding family to slow down. They celebrated their 50th anniversary, an occasion that brought family from as far as San Francisco, everyone wanting to honor the couple who had become legendary in their own way. At the party, Thomas stood to make a toast. "My parents met during a blizzard," he told the assembled crowd. "My mother was riding to save her brother, willing to die if that was what it took to get him medicine. My father was riding back from business, but he did not hesitate when he saw someone in need. He rode through that storm to deliver medicine to a stranger, and in doing so, he found the love of his life. They taught all of us that love is not just words or feelings. Love is action. Love is sacrifice. Love is meeting someone halfway when they need you most, and then walking beside them for the rest of your days." There was not a dry eye in the room, and Emma saw Harrison wipe at his face surreptitiously. She took his hand and squeezed it, and he squeezed back, a silent conversation that needed no words. Emma Ashford Quinn died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 76. Harrison's arms around her, just as they had been for nearly 54 years of marriage. She simply did not wake one morning, and the doctor said her heart had given out, though those who knew her best said it was more that her heart was too full, that it had loved so much and so deeply that it had nothing left to give. Harrison was devastated. For the first time in decades, he could not bring himself to ride out to the herd or work on the ranch. He sat on the porch of the house they had built together, staring out at the valley, and everyone worried he might simply will himself to die from grief. But Thomas sat with his father one evening, a week after Emma's funeral, and said, "She would not want you to give up. You know that. She would want you to keep living, to keep caring for this place you built together, to keep being there for all of us." Harrison looked at his son, seeing Emma's green eyes looking back at him from Thomas's face, and nodded slowly. "You are right. She would be furious with me for sitting here feeling sorry for myself." "She would," Thomas agreed, smiling slightly. "She would tell you to get up and get to work, that the cattle do not care if you are grieving." Harrison laughed, a rusty sound but genuine. "Yes, she would say exactly that." He stood, his joints protesting, and looked out at the ranch spread before them. "All right then, for Emma, we keep going." And he did. Harrison Quinn lived another 5 years, seeing the ranch through droughts and good years, watching his grandchildren grow and his great-grandchildren be born. He told stories about Emma to anyone who would listen, keeping her memory alive with words and laughter. He maintained the house exactly as she had left it, as if she might walk through the door at any moment and laugh at him for rearranging things. When Harrison finally passed, quietly and peacefully at 81 years old, his children buried him next to Emma in the cemetery overlooking the valley. The headstone reads simply, "Harrison Quinn, beloved husband, father, and friend." Beside it, Emma's stone read, "Emma Ashford Quinn, fierce heart, gentle soul," but their real legacy was not in stone. It was in the ranch that still flourished under Thomas's management, in the school that Grace had built, in the horses that William bred, in the large, loving family that gathered every year to remember and celebrate. It was in the stories told around dinner tables, of a blizzard and a desperate ride, of a cowboy who kept his word and a woman brave enough to trust him, of a love that started with sacrifice and grew into something that changed everyone it touched. The Miller Ranch had long since been absorbed into the Quinn holdings, but the original Ashford ranch house still stood, maintained now as a family gathering place where great-great-grandchildren ran through the same rooms where Emma and Harrison had raised their babies. The lined shack in the mountains became something of a pilgrimage site for the family, a place where young couples went to hear the story of their ancestors, and to imagine what it must have been like, riding through that terrible storm. And sometimes, when winter brought snow to the California foothills and wind howled through the mountain passes, people swore they could see 2 riders in the distance, a man and a woman on horseback, meeting halfway between 2 towns, their love strong enough to cross any storm, to bridge any distance, to last beyond death itself into the realm of legend and memory. The end of Emma and Harrison's story was not sad, despite death, despite loss. It was triumphant because they had lived fully and loved completely. They had built something that lasted, something that mattered, something that would echo through generations. They had proven that sometimes the worst moments of our lives, the terrifying, desperate moments when everything seems lost, can become the doorways to our greatest joys. Emma had ridden through a blizzard to save her brother. Harrison had met her halfway and helped her carry that burden. And in doing so, they had found each other, had built a life and a love that became the foundation for dozens of other lives and loves, rippling outward like circles in water, touching more people than they could have ever imagined. That is what real love does. It does not just change 2 people. It changes everything around them. It becomes a force that shapes the world, one small act of courage and kindness at a time. Emma and Harrison's love started with a ride through a storm, but it ended in sunshine and grandchildren and laughter and a ranch full of life. It ended, as all the best love stories do, with happily ever after, not because there were no more challenges or sorrows, but because they faced every single one of them together, hand in hand, heart to heart, until the very end and beyond.